Roberto arrived before anyone else, not before Norma. Norma is a law of physics, not a person, and she arrives when she arrives regardless of the intentions of others. But before Carol, before Sarah, before the girls, Roberto came through the back door at 9:51, carrying a paper bag and wearing the same carefully pressed shirt as the week before. He set the bag on the counter. He said, "Pandebono, Colombian cheese bread. Gloria made it every Sunday. I found her recipe this week." He said it with the specific, contained pride of a man who has solved a problem that mattered. I told him I was glad. He said, "It is not exactly right. It is the first attempt." She would have told me what was wrong with it immediately and precisely. She always knew. He looked at the bag. "But it is something. It is in the direction of right," I told him. "First attempts usually were." He looked at the windowsill. The yellow bird was still there, between the fake succulent and the cactus. He looked at it for a moment with the expression of a man confirming that something he placed with intention has remained where it was placed. He said, "Good." He sat down. I made the coffee. We sat at the table in the quiet of two people who had done enough talking the week before to be comfortable now without talking. The specific ease of a kitchen where something has been established and does not need to be re-established each time. After a while, he said, "I told my son about Tuesday. I asked him what his son said. He said he was skeptical. He is an accountant. He thinks in categories. He did not know which category this was." He paused. I told him it was the category of useful. He said that was not a category. I told him it was the only category that mattered. He looked at his coffee. He said, he asked if I had talked to a therapist. I told him I had talked to a retired emergency physician, a woman from Cleveland, a widow who makes cookies from her husband's recipe, and 2 9-year-olds, and that the result had been more useful than any therapist I could imagine. He paused. He did not know what to say to that. I told him that was probably the correct response. He said, "He is coming next week, my son. Felipe. He wants to see this for himself." He looked at me. "Is that all right?" I told him the table had been growing and there was room. He said, he will ask practical questions. He is not like me. I ask the questions underneath the practical ones. He will ask the practical ones first. I told him practical questions were welcome too. He said, "Good. He is a good man. He is just still in the part of grief where he thinks the grief can be organized into something manageable if he finds the right system." He paused. "He will learn. He is smart." Norma arrived at 10:04. She came through the door, registered Roberto already at the table, registered the bag on the counter, and said, "What's in the bag?" Roberto said, "Gloria's pandebono. First attempt." Norma said, "What's pandebono?" Roberto said, "Colombian cheese bread. You will like it." "What does it taste like?" Roberto said. "Like Sunday morning when everything was still right." Norma sat down. She said, "Then I will definitely like it." The first story Roberto told, and Wyatt stopped the table. Carol and Sarah arrived together at 10:10. Lily and Maya 2 minutes behind them. Maya now carrying her backpack correctly on her back, without being reminded. The transition from visitor to regular completed at some point in the previous weeks, without announcement. The pandebono was distributed. It was warm still, slightly dense, with the specific quality of something homemade by someone who is learning. The right ingredients assembled with the right intention, but not yet with the right hands. Not exactly right. In the direction of right. Everyone said so. in their own way. Maya said, Abuelo, the texture. Roberto said, I know. Tell me. Maya said, it's a little heavier than hers, she would say. Roberto said, she would say, I used too much tapioca flour. She always said I measured wrong when I tried to help. She said I had engineer hands, not baker's hands. Engineer hands measure too precisely. Baking requires feel. Maya said, yes, exactly. Roberto said, I measured precisely. I will measure less precisely next time. Norma said, that is the most counterintuitive baking advice I have ever heard, and I believe it completely. Roberto said, it is what she would have said. He ate his piece. He said, it is not right, but it is hers. I can feel her in the direction of it. He looked at the table. He said, I want to tell you a story. If that is all right, he said, I want to tell you about the first time I understood what I had. Not the first time I loved her. I loved her from the beginning, from the dance in 1977. But the first time I understood the specific, unrepeatable quality of the thing I had. He paused. He said, it was 1989. We had been married 11 years. Our son Felipe was 7. We were living in a small apartment. We were saving, building towards something, the way you do in the early years. We did not have much. We had enough, but not much. He said, there was a neighbor, an old man named Mr. Asante. He had come from Ghana 30 years before. He lived alone. He had family somewhere, but they were not close and they did not visit often. He was quiet. He kept to himself. I knew him by sight and by name. That was all. He said, one December, cold winter, New Jersey, the specific cold of a place that commits to cold. I noticed that Mr. Asante had not taken in his mail for 4 days. I noticed because I walked past his mailbox every day, and I am an observant person by training. I knocked. No answer. I knocked again. Nothing. He said, I went home. I told Gloria, I said, the old man has not taken in his mail for 4 days. He looked at the table. He said, she was on the phone with her sister within 30 seconds. She said, Miriam, I have to call you back. Then she was in the hallway with me. She said, what number is his apartment? I told her. She said, I will try the super. You try the building manager. He said, within 20 minutes, we had the super, the building manager, and 2 other neighbors at Mr. Asante's door. He had fallen. He had been on the floor for most of those 4 days. He was dehydrated and injured, but he was alive. He said, the ambulance came. I rode with him, because Gloria said, someone should ride with him. He should not go alone. She stayed with Felipe. I went. He paused. He said, at the hospital, while we were waiting, Mr. Asante looked at me and he said, how did you know? I told him I had noticed the mail. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, in 30 years in that building, no one ever noticed. He said it simply, without emphasis, and let it sit. The table was very still. He said, when I came home, Gloria was in the kitchen. She had made soup, enough for us and enough for Mr. Asante when he came home. She had called his daughter in Atlanta. She had found the number through the building manager, and she had told her what happened and what hospital her father was in. She had already done all of it. He said, I looked at her in the kitchen, and I thought, 30 years. and no one noticed. And she noticed in 30 seconds. He said, that was the moment I understood what I had. He was quiet. Then he said, not what I had in the sense of, I have a good wife. In the sense of, there is a quality in this person that is rare, that is not produced by circumstance or taught by example or built through effort. It is simply there. It is who she is. And I am the person who gets to be in the same house as it. He looked at the yellow bird on the windowsill. He said, Mr. Asante came home from the hospital 11 days later. Gloria had visited him twice while he was there. She had brought food both times. After he came home, she checked on him every week for the next 6 years until we moved. When we moved, she cried because she was leaving him. He said he sent her a card every Christmas until he died. He addressed them to Gloria, who noticed. He set down his coffee cup. He said, that is one of the 46 years. What the story opened, and what I said that I had not said before. Nobody spoke for a moment after Roberto finished. The specific quiet of a table that has received something significant and is taking a moment to understand what it received. Then Lily said she noticed because she was paying attention. Roberto looked at her. She said, most people don't notice things because they're not paying attention to the world outside themselves. Grandma notices things like that because she's always... She stopped, started again. She was always looking outward, not inward. Roberto said, yes, that is precise. Lily said, my grandma does that too. She notices when I'm having a quiet day before I say anything. She asks before I ask for it. Carol said, I learned it from Richard, actually. He was the one who noticed things first. I learned to look in the direction he was looking. Sarah said, he taught you to notice. Carol said, he taught me by example. He never said, Carol, you should pay more attention to the people around you. He just paid attention. And eventually I started doing it too. I sat with that for a moment. The transmission of noticing. The way that living alongside a person who is fully present eventually teaches you, without a single lesson, to be more present yourself. The way the quality of attention is contagious when you are close enough to someone long enough. I thought about Margaret. I thought about what I had said to Carol weeks ago, that I just wish you'd notice more of the things that are right in front of you. What Margaret had said to me early in our marriage as an accurate observation. I had not been a noticer. I had been an observer of patterns from a professional distance. I had been trained to see the significant signal in the data, and I had applied that training so thoroughly to medicine that I had not had much noticing left over for the kitchen, and the porch, and the woman in it. And Margaret, who was, in her own quieter way, a noticer in the Gloria mode, had spent 40 years in the same house as that quality of attention, and had absorbed some of it. Had she taught me? Had I, in the 8 months, finally let the transmission happen? I said, Roberto, what you said about understanding what you had, the specific quality of it, I want to tell you something about that, because I think it matters beyond your story. He looked at me. I said, most of us understand what we have in retrospect. We understand it in grief, in the shaped absence, in the specific way the room reorganizes itself around the person who is no longer in it. The Mr. Asante story. That was a glimpse. You saw it clearly for a moment in 1989, and then the clarity faded, and the extraordinary became ordinary again, the way it always does when it is present every day. He said, yes, the tragedy is not that we stop seeing it. The tragedy is that we do not find ways to keep seeing it. to keep the extraordinary from disappearing into the background of a shared life, to keep noticing the person we are with the way we noticed them in the first moments of understanding what we have. I said, Margaret showed me what I had in the 8 months, the last 8 months, when the diagnosis made the time finite, and the finite time made the ordinary extraordinary again. And what I discovered in those 8 months was that the extraordinary had never gone anywhere. The quality I had loved in 1979, through a slightly open door in a Pittsburgh corridor. That quality was in every room of our house for 41 years. I just stopped seeing it. I paused. I said, I am telling you this because you have 46 years of Gloria stories, and the fact that you have them, the fact that you can sit at this table and tell them with her name in every third sentence, with the specific warmth of a man who accumulated 46 years of proof that he had something extraordinary. That tells me you did not stop seeing her. Not the way I stopped seeing Margaret. You kept noticing, he said. Not always. There were years. I said, there are always years. He said, but you are right that I kept coming back to it, to the seeing of her. Something would happen, and I would think, I have the rarest thing. I would forget it, and then I would remember it. The forgetting and the remembering. He paused. Is that enough? The remembering? I told him it was more than enough. I told him the remembering was the whole thing. Norma's contribution. And why it landed the way it did. About 90 minutes into the morning, in the way that Norma's most important contributions arrived, unexpectedly, between other things, without preparation or ceremony, Norma said something that made everyone stop. Roberto had been telling another story, a smaller one. Gloria at a school event when Felipe was 10. The specific and characteristic way she had handled a situation that had embarrassed their son. The combination of grace and directness that was so uniquely hers that Felipe, 30 years later, still told it as the story of how his mother worked. Norma had been listening. When Roberto finished, she said, "Can I say something?" The table looked at her. She said, "I've been sitting here for 16 Tuesdays, listening to people talk about the people they lost, and I want to say something that I haven't said yet." She put her hands on the table. "I've been thinking about it since last week, since Roberto put the yellow bird on the windowsill." She paused. She said, "When Dennis died, I thought the hardest part was going to be the loneliness. I thought, I am a person who needs people around her. And now the main person is gone, and this is going to be the thing that breaks me." She looked at her hands, and it was hard. The loneliness was hard, but it was not the hardest part. She said, the hardest part was not knowing what to do with the stories. She said it quietly, which for Norma was the equivalent of saying it very loudly. She said, "Dennis and I had 38 years of stories, and when he died, I had all of them and nowhere to put them. I couldn't tell them to Dennis because he was gone. I couldn't tell them to strangers because they didn't have the context. I couldn't tell them to my family because every time I started, I could see them worrying about whether I was going to be okay." She paused. "So I kept them inside. For months, I kept all 38 years of stories inside, because I had nowhere to put them, where they would be received the way they deserved." She looked at Roberto. She said, "I want you to know that you can put yours here, all 46 years, whenever you need to. The table will receive them." She said it simply, as a statement of fact and a statement of intention, simultaneously. Roberto looked at her. He said, "I know. I felt that last week." She said, "Good." She picked up her coffee. She said, "Also, I want more pandebono." The texture is improving as it cools, I think. Roberto said, "You are a precise taster." Norma said, "I am precise about everything. It is one of my few virtues." Maya said, "That's not true. You have lots of virtues." Norma said, "Name one." Maya said, "You show up." Norma said, "That is a virtue." Yes. Maya said, "And you make people feel like their questions are worth asking." Norma said, "Also yes." Maya said, "And you knew what to say to my abuelo last week when nobody else knew what to say." She said, "That was just accurate observation." Maya said, "Accurate observation at the right moment is a virtue." Norma said, "All right, fine. I have virtues." She said it with the specific, slightly reluctant satisfaction of a woman who has been argued into accepting a compliment and is not entirely displeased about it. Roberto watched this exchange with the small smile that had appeared on his face the previous week and had returned today. The smile of a man who is recognizing something in a room that he recognized in a different room for 46 years. The room that fills itself. The room where people announce their gladness in their particular ways, and the announcing accumulates into something that is more than the sum of its parts. The patient I thought about while Roberto was talking. I want to tell you about a man I treated in my 35th year of emergency medicine. Because something Roberto said. The forgetting and the remembering, the quality of attention that returns to the extraordinary between the ordinary years, made me think of him with a clarity that had not been available to me when I was in the room with him. His name, I'll call him Martin, was 68 years old. He came in alone, a cardiac situation that was serious but stabilized quickly. He had been married for 40 years to a woman named Patricia, who arrived at the hospital about 30 minutes after the ambulance. Patricia was small, precise, slightly formal, in the way of a woman who has spent her professional life in a role that required careful management of how she was perceived. She came into the consultation room, and she sat down, and she said, immediately, "Is he going to be all right?" I told her he was stable and we were optimistic. She closed her eyes for exactly 2 seconds. Then she opened them. She said, "Good. I need to tell him something. When can I see him?" I told her soon. I asked if there was anything she needed while she waited. She said, "No, thank you." She sat perfectly still for 25 minutes. When I brought her in to see Martin, she walked to his bed, and she stood beside him, and she said, "You scared me." He said, "I know." She said, "I need to tell you something." He said, "All right." She said, "I have been thinking on the drive here and in the waiting room about what I would have said if I had not gotten here in time. And I realized that what I would have wanted to say, what I would have been most upset about not having said, was something I have thought many times and never said." He looked at her. She said, "You make ordinary things interesting. You have always made ordinary things interesting. The drive to work, the grocery store, the news, the things that happen in the neighborhood. Things that I would pass through without noticing. You notice them, and you make them interesting. And it makes my life larger than it would be without you." She said it with the specific precision of a woman who had composed it in the waiting room and was delivering it exactly as composed. He said, "Patricia." She said, "I know I don't say things like this. I'm saying it now because I should have said it before, and I almost didn't get the chance." He reached for her hand. She gave it. She said, "You make ordinary things interesting. I wanted you to know." I left the room. I thought about that conversation for a long time. Not because it was dramatic. It wasn't. It was two people at a hospital bed saying something that should have been said at a kitchen table 20 years earlier. But because of what Patricia had identified, the specific, named, irreplaceable quality of the person she was with. Not, I love you. She knew he knew that. Not, thank you for 40 years. That was true, but too broad to land with precision. The specific thing. The exact and unrepeatable quality that made her life larger. You make ordinary things interesting. That sentence, delivered to his face in the specific voice that was hers, was the dentist card, given rather than kept in the desk. The Richard journal entry said out loud rather than written in the back of a notebook. I have thought about Martin and Patricia many times since then. I thought about them again while Roberto was telling the story of Mr. Asante's mail. Because what Roberto had identified in 1989, the quality in Gloria that was rare, that was simply there, that was who she was his version of Patricia's sentence. The specific, exact, irreplaceable thing. She notices. She mobilizes. She makes the 30 years of no one noticing into a 20-minute response, and a soup, and a phone call to a daughter in Atlanta. That was Gloria's version of, you make ordinary things interesting. The specific sentence that names the exact quality. The sentence that tells a person not just that they are loved, but what their love does in the world. The sentence that deserves to be said while the person is alive to receive it. What happened when Roberto asked his question, and what it produced. About 2 hours into the morning, when the pandebono was finished, and the cookies were mostly finished, and the conversation had ranged through several of Gloria's stories, and one of Dennis's, and a brief detour into a story of Carol's, about Richard, and a broken lawnmower. That made everyone laugh, including Roberto. The room found one of its settling moments, and Roberto said, I want to ask you something, all of you. The table waited. He said, when Gloria died, the days after, the weeks, I found myself doing something I did not expect. I found myself looking for her in things, not in the large things, in the small things, the specific ways she had touched the world and left marks. He said, I found her reading glasses on the bedside table. She had 3 pairs because she was always losing them. She had been wearing the pair from the bedside table the night before she died. I moved them to the kitchen table for a while, then to the windowsill. He paused. Then I put them in a drawer, not because I was done with her, because I understood that I didn't need the glasses to find her anymore. I knew where she was. He said, what I want to ask is this. Where did you find yours? After. In the weeks when you were looking for them in small things. The table sat with the question for a moment. Carol went first. She said, Richard's handwriting. I found it everywhere. Notes in books he'd been reading, a grocery list from 6 months before he died that had fallen behind a drawer, the margins of a newspaper he'd saved for some reason. Every time I found his handwriting, I felt him specifically. Not the idea of him, his hand making those letters, his mind on whatever the thing was. She paused. I started keeping the pieces of paper. I have a box now. I call it the handwriting box. I called his phone 3 days after he died just to hear it. I knew what I was doing. I did it anyway. Norma said, the mug. I told you about the mug. But before the mug, there was his laugh. I used to hear something funny and think, Dennis would have laughed at that. And then for a moment I would hear the laugh. His specific laugh, which was quiet and happened in his shoulders. Not real. I knew it wasn't real, but accurate. The memory of the sound, precise enough to feel like the thing. She paused. She said, I still do that. 4 years later, I still hear it. Lily said, with Grandpa, my grandpa who died before I was old enough to know him well, I find him in Grandma's hands when she does certain things. The way she holds a pen. He's in the way. She holds a pen, she told me once, because he taught her to hold it differently, and she's been doing it his way for 50 years. Maya said. Grandma's laugh. When I laugh really hard, the kind that takes over, my mom says, "There's Gloria." She says I laugh exactly like her, and I don't know if it's true, because I can't hear myself, but I like that it might be true. Roberto was listening to all of this with the complete, full attention of a man receiving exactly what he needed. He said, "For me, it is her voice," he said, "not in memory, in the actual room. I know it is not real. I know it is my mind constructing what I expect to hear in certain moments. But when I am working on something difficult, something that requires the kind of patience I am not always good at, I hear her say, 'Roberto, despacio,' slowly. She always said that when I was rushing at a problem. Despacio." He said, I hear it in her voice, in Spanish, in the exact intonation she used. He said, and I slow down. He said, "She is still teaching me." The table was quiet. Maya said, "Good." She said it the way she always said it, as a conclusion, a practical confirmation that the thing was as it should be. She said, "She's still teaching you. The love goes to a lot of places. It went to Despacio." What I told the table that I had been working toward. I want to tell you something I said at this table that I have been building toward for 16 weeks. Not all at once. I have been building toward it piece by piece, from the 400 patients, and the patterns, and the 8 months, and the letter, and the mornings, and Dorothy, and the relationship inventory, and all the things this table has accumulated over 16 Tuesdays. I said it because Roberto's question, "Where did you find yours?" made the complete version available for the first time. I said, "I want to tell you something about what the people in those rooms taught me. All of them together, across 40 years. Not one lesson, one understanding." The table was listening. I said, "Every person I watched approach the end of their life went through a process of reduction. Not a physical reduction, the clinical and interior one. The things that had occupied the foreground of their lives, the work, the status, the achievements, the ongoing management of an identity, those things receded. And what was left in the foreground, sometimes for the first time in years, sometimes for the first time ever, was the actual inventory, the relationships, the love given and received, the specific people whose names they said in the window." I said, what those moments revealed was not what the person had failed to do. It revealed what they had actually built. And the people who had built something real, who had, in whatever imperfect and interrupted and completely human way, managed to stay connected to the people they loved, to say the things when they needed to be said, to notice and to show up, and to keep coming back to the seeing of what they had. Those people arrived at the end with something that was visible, a quality I can only describe as completion. I paused. I said, not perfection, not the absence of regret, not the feeling that everything had been done exactly right. Completion. The sense that the essential things had been attended to, that the people who mattered knew they mattered, that the love had had somewhere to go. I looked at the table, at Roberto with his pandebono and his 46 years of stories and the yellow bird on the windowsill, at Carol with her cookies and her handwriting box and the recipe that now lived in her hands as much as on the card. At Norma with her dentist days, and her mug, and the way she came through the back door every Tuesday like a law of physics. At Sarah, who was softer now than she had been when she arrived 12 weeks ago, the maintained composure gradually giving way to the settled kind. At Lily, who had written her questions in a notebook and asked them in order, and changed something at this table with each one. At Maya, who had walked in, holding her grandfather's hand, and said the love goes to a lot of places, and had been right. I said, what I want to tell you is this. Every person at this table, every person who has been at this table across 16 weeks, is already building toward that completion. The showing up, the stories told with the right name in every third sentence, the yogurt in the refrigerator, the pandebono that is in the direction of right, the yellow bird that says the room is glad. All of it is the building. I said, you are not failing to be present. You are practicing presence. Every Tuesday is a practice. The recipes, the questions, the named specific things that one person does for another without knowing it matters. This is the practice, I said, and the practice, accumulated over ordinary days, is what produces the completion. Not one large gesture, not the letter written before the diagnosis or the confession in the hospital room. The practice, the Tuesday, the Despacio said, in the right voice, at the right moment, by a woman who is still teaching her husband to slow down because the love went there, and it is still going. Roberto was looking at the yellow bird. He said, she sent me here. I told him I thought she had. He said, she knew this was the direction. I told him she had always known the direction. He said, she was always better at directions than I was. He paused. She used to say, Roberto, you can find a structural flaw in a building from a photograph, but you cannot find a grocery store without GPS. He said it with the warmth of a man quoting something he has quoted many times and will quote many more. She was right. She was always right about directions. He looked at the table. He said, I am going in the right direction. I told him yes. He said, good. That is what I needed to confirm. What Norma said, that she will never admit, was the most important thing said today. At the end of the morning, as people were gathering their things, and the table was doing the slow, affectionate dispersal of a gathering that has done what it came to do, Norma said something. She was standing at the counter putting on her coat. She said, to no one in particular, and therefore to everyone, I have been thinking about something since last week, since the yellow bird. She said, when Dennis died, I did not know what to do with myself. I was 66 years old, and I had been half of something for 38 years, and suddenly I was a whole, and I did not know how to be a whole. I kept trying to be half of something, but the other half was gone. She said, and then one morning I woke up, and I thought, this is not a temporary condition. This is the condition. And either I figure out how to be a whole person, or I spend the rest of my life being a half person waiting for the other half to come back. She said, so I started showing up. Not for any particular reason and not with any particular strategy. I just started showing up for the people around me. Because I needed to be a whole person, and I had found, in 38 years with Dennis, that I was most whole when I was useful. When I was in the room with people who needed something, and I had the thing they needed. She said, I didn't know I was doing that. I thought I was just being myself, being loud and bringing food and saying the true things, because the true things needed to be said. She said, but Roberto said it last week, the announcing kind of loud, the kind that says, I am glad you are here. She paused. She said, I am glad. I have been glad at every one of these Tuesdays for 16 weeks. I didn't know how to say it in the right words until he said it, but that is what it has been. She looked at the table. She said, "I am glad you are all here." She said it simply, without ceremony, in the same tone she used when she reported on the quality of the pandebono or the state of the coffee filters. And then she put on her coat and left. The room was quiet. Maya said, "She said it." I asked her what she meant. She said, "Grandma Gloria always said, if you feel it, you should say it. Norma felt it for 16 weeks, and today she said it." She looked at the door Norma had gone through. Grandma would have liked that. What comes next? And what Roberto said at the door. "Felipe is coming next week," Roberto told us as he was leaving. His son, the accountant, the man who thinks in categories and believes the grief can be organized into something manageable, if the right system is found. Roberto told us he had described the table to Felipe, and Felipe had said, "It sounds like a grief support group." Roberto had said, "It sounds like that to me too, which is why I go." Felipe had said he wanted to see for himself. Roberto had told him, "Bring your practical questions. They are welcome." Before he left, Roberto stood at the back door, the door where the real things get said, and he looked at the windowsill one more time. He said, "I have been thinking about what you said, about the practice, about how the Tuesday is the building." I told him I was glad it had landed. He said, "I want to tell you something about the yogurt." I waited. He said, "I bought one kind this week." He said it without drama. He said, "I stood in the store and I picked up my kind." And I stood there for a moment, and I thought about whether to reach for hers. And I thought, she is in the pandebono. She is in the despacio. She is in the yellow bird. She is in Maya's hands when she pours the vanilla, and in the way my son calls me on Sundays, because Gloria taught him that Sunday was the day you called your parents. He paused. She does not need to be in the refrigerator anymore. She is in better places. He said, "I bought one yogurt." He said, "It was all right." He said it with the specific, quiet confidence of a man who has taken a step that was ready to be taken and has found that it held. I told him I was glad. He said, "She would have said, 'Finally, Roberto, you always take longer than necessary.'" He smiled. He said, "She would have been right." He left. The back door closed. Bo went to the door and stood for a moment. I looked at the windowsill, the fake succulent, the cactus, the yellow bird, and I thought about what Roberto had said. She is in better places. That is the whole thing, I thought. That is everything this table has been working toward for 16 weeks. The understanding that the people we love are not trapped in the objects we keep for them. That the yogurt and the mug and the reading glasses and the handwriting box are all legitimate and necessary stages of the carrying, and that the stage that comes after, the stage where you understand that they are in better places, in the despacio and the vanilla and the Sunday phone call and the way their grandchild laughs when the laugh takes over, that stage is not the loss of them. It is the completion of them. They have been distributed into the world. The love went to a lot of places, and the room is glad. What I want you to take from this: 3 things. The first is Patricia's sentence, the specific one, the one she composed in the waiting room and delivered to Martin's face before she lost the chance. You have a version of it for someone in your life. Not, "I love you," though that too. The specific version. The exact and irreplaceable quality that makes your life larger. The thing this person does that no one else does, that you have accumulated evidence of over years and that you have kept mostly interior because the right moment never came. The right moment is now. Find the sentence, the specific one, not the general one. The Roberto version. She notices in 30 seconds what took 30 years for anyone else. The Patricia version. You make ordinary things interesting. The Richard version. Carol understood this one. Your version. For your person. Say it today. Not because they don't know. Because the knowing that comes from the saying is different from the knowing that comes from inference. It lands differently. It stays differently. It produces the specific, complete quality of a person who has been fully seen, named, specific, irreplaceable, by the person whose seeing matters most. Say it. The second is Norma's sentence, which she has been carrying for 16 weeks and finally said out loud today. I am glad you are here. Find a way to say it, in your words, in your form, in whatever language is natural to you, to the people who show up for you, to the people you show up for, to the table you sit at, in whatever form your table takes. Say it while they are in the room to receive it. The third is Roberto's understanding, which I think is the most important thing anyone has brought to this table. She is in better places. When you are ready, when the object has served its purpose, and you understand that you do not need it anymore because you have found the better places, let it go. Not because you are done with them, because they are in better places. The dispatio in the right voice, the Sunday phone call, the vanilla measured with the right hands, the laugh that takes over before it can be contained. Those are better places. Let them be there. In the comments, tell me where yours is. Not in the object, in the better place. Where have you found them in the weeks and months and years since they were gone? Tell me. And next week, Felipe is coming. Roberto says he asks practical questions. I have a feeling, knowing who his father is and whose kitchen he is walking into, that the practical questions are going to be the beginning of something else. They usually are. My name is Dr. Edward Carver. I'll see you then.